This story was told 3 times. Once by the Vikings, once by Shakespeare, once by Disney. And in each version, in each and every one, someone took the darkest element, the most politically uncomfortable part, the most genuinely disturbing thing about the original story and erased it. Once you understand what each version erased and why, you will never again be able to hear Circle of Life and think it is a song about nature. Denmark, the 13th century, before Shakespeare existed. A king lies dead in his banquet hall. No visible wounds. The poison left his body perfectly intact, as though he had simply decided to fall asleep on his own. Next to the throne stands the dead king's brother, smiling at the lords of the realm with the same smile he used to pour them wine an hour ago. In the corner of the hall, a boy watches. He is perhaps 12 years old. He has just seen his father die. He has just understood, with the terrible clarity that only children and the condemned ever have, that if the killer suspects he knows, he will be next. The boy makes a decision that will keep him alive for years. He decides to go mad. This boy's name is Amleth, not Simba, not Hamlet. His story predates Disney's musical about giraffes by 800 years. And what that story says about power, revenge, and the order of the world is exactly the opposite of what Disney wants your children to believe. Let's begin. Most of the videos you've already seen about the Lion King stop at a single fact. It's based on Hamlet, and that's true, but it's only half the story, because Hamlet wasn't original either. Shakespeare took a 12th century Danish chronicle, the Gesta Danorum by Saxo Grammaticus, and rewrote the most ferocious avenger in medieval literature until he became the most indecisive man in the history of theater. And then Disney took that indecisive man and turned him into a lion cub learning to forgive himself. And with each turn of that wheel, the story became a little more harmless, a little more comfortable, a little more useful to whoever held power at that moment. That is not a coincidence. Saxo Grammaticus was a Danish cleric who, at the end of the 12th century, dedicated himself to compiling the oral sagas of his people. What he wrote about Amleth is not a philosophical story about the meaning of life. It is a manual of political survival. Amleth's father, King Horvendil, is murdered by his brother Fengo. Fengo does not act out of irrational jealousy or secret ambition. He acts because that is how dynastic power operates in the medieval Norse world. The brother of a dead king has access to the throne. The structure allows it. The murder is a political move, not a personal pathology. Amleth understands this, and he understands something else. Fengo cannot afford to let the boy live if he suspects the child knows the truth. So Amleth does something that no subsequent version of this story dared to preserve in its full, cold logic. He feigns madness for years. Not melancholy, not philosophical, madness. He crawls along the floor. He speaks nonsense. He eats with his hands. He lets his uncle's courtiers treat him like a dog and smiles while they do it, because he knows that a madman is not a threat, and a madman survives. Saxo Grammaticus tells us that Fengo, growing suspicious, sets traps. He sends a young woman, unnamed in the original version, to seduce Amleth and see if he reacts like a sane man. Amleth takes her to a forest far from the spies. Fengo sends a man to hide in the queen's chamber and eavesdrop on the conversation between mother and son. Amleth finds him beneath the mattress, stabs him, butchers him, boils him, and feeds him to the pigs. This is not a metaphor. Saxo writes it with the same dry prose he uses to describe a military campaign. And the ending of Amleth's story is not a redemption scene on a sunlit rock. It is Amleth waiting until his uncle and the lords of the realm are completely drunk at a banquet, nailing the hall's drapes to the walls with stakes so that no one can rise, setting the entire building on fire, and watching it burn while outside the people proclaim him the rightful king. There is no circle of life, no sunlit monolith, No ghost of the father telling you to remember who you are. There is a building in flames and a man who has spent years waiting for this moment. Shakespeare writes Hamlet between 1600 and 1601. He is working within the court of Elizabeth I of England. And there is something you need to understand about writing theater in the Elizabethan court. A play about a man who kills the king who usurped his father's throne was literally potential subversive propaganda. Elizabeth I had executed Mary, Queen of Scots, 13 years earlier. She had spent decades crushing conspiracies against her throne. Any play that presented regicide as a heroic and legitimate act could be read, by the right censors, at the wrong moment, as an instruction manual. Shakespeare needed to tell the story of Amleth, and he needed that story to be impossible to use as a justification for killing anyone. His solution was brilliant and political. He turned the avenger into a philosopher. Shakespeare's Hamlet does not butcher spies, he observes them. He does not burn buildings, he hesitates. The central question of the play is not, how do I reclaim power, but does acting even make sense in a world this corrupt? Hamlet's paralysis is not a character flaw, it is the political function of the play. If Hamlet acted with Amleth's efficiency, the play would become a glorification of regicide. So Shakespeare invented something new in literature, the hero who cannot act because he feels too much and thinks too much. The hero whose inner depth is in practice his paralysis. And here is the mechanism that no one names when they speak of Hamlet as a great work of the Western canon. Shakespeare took a story about the mechanisms of power and turned it into a story about the mechanisms of the mind. Amleth asked you, who holds power and how did they take it? Hamlet asks you, does it make sense to exist? One question is political, the other is personal. One points outward, the other drives you inward. And while the audience is absorbed in Hamlet's interior question, no one is thinking about the power structure that produced the murdering uncle. 1994. Disney carries the story 3 centuries forward and does something neither Saxo nor Shakespeare had dared to do. It eliminates politics entirely. In Amleth, the conflict is over the throne, a concrete resource, a real form of power. In Hamlet, the conflict is over justice. Killing the father's murderer is a moral imperative. In The Lion King, the conflict is over guilt. Can Simba forgive himself for his father's death? The question has changed completely, and with it, everything else. Look at what happened to Scar. In Amleth, the murdering uncle operates within a structure that permits him. He is a rational actor inside a brutal system of power. You understand his logic, even if you reject it. In Hamlet, Claudius feels guilt. The play gives him enough interiority for you to see him as a corrupted human being, not merely a monster. In The Lion King, Scar is evil, period. He has no structural motivation. He has jealousy and ambition. He does not represent any system. He represents an individual deviation from an order that, without him, would be perfect. And then there are the hyenas. They do not exist in the original story. They are a Disney invention, and what they do narratively is crucial. They represent the chaos that arrives when those from below seize power. Under their rule, the pride lands wither, the herds vanish, the circle of life breaks. The message is not hidden. When those without lineage govern, the world is destroyed. And then there is Circle of Life. The song that opens the film is, in musical terms, one of the most beautiful compositions Disney ever produced. And in ideological terms, it is extraordinarily efficient. It tells you that every creature has an assigned place, that the antelope is eaten by the lion not out of cruelty, but by cosmic design, that hierarchy is not a historical construction, it is the natural order of the universe. This is where you need to stop and ask the question Disney never wanted you to ask. Amleth was Danish, Hamlet was Danish. The central conflict, the throne, the brother, the poison, was born in the snow of Northern Europe. In the medieval sagas, in the fjords, in the wooden halls where Vikings drank and conspired. Why did Disney move it to Africa? The official answer was that the directors wanted an epic setting, a visual scale that theater and cinema had never been able to give the story. But there is a more precise answer, and to find it, you have to understand what ideological function the setting serves in this story. The central argument of The Lion King, the thesis the film repeats in every scene, every song, every image, is that there is a natural order to the world, that there is a place for everything, that the king holds the place that belongs to him, that when that order breaks, everything is destroyed, and that when the rightful king returns, the world blooms again. That argument requires the setting to look natural, not constructed, not political, not historical. It needs to look as though it has always been this way. And in 1994, for a Western audience, nothing looked more natural, more primordial, more prior to human history than the African savanna. Disney did not choose Africa because it wanted to tell an African story. It chose Africa because it needed a setting that would make hierarchy look inevitable. But if that still seems like an abstract reading, consider what Disney did with the only characters in the film who ask the politically inconvenient question. In The Lion King, the only time anyone asks out loud why the order exists, who decided it, and why it has to be this way, that question is asked by Shenzi, the hyena. Her question is exactly this: why do the lions get all the food? It is the same question Elphaba asks in Wicked. It is the same question Baum's Scarecrow asked implicitly. It is the question Amleth answered by burning buildings. Who decided who governs, and by what right? In The Lion King, that question is not asked by a philosopher or a revolutionary. It is asked by an animal associated with filth, cowardice, nervous laughter, and scavenging. And the hyenas are not only animals, they are specific voices. Shenzi speaks with the voice of Whoopi Goldberg. Bonsai speaks with the voice of Cheech Marin. Think about what that means. The only characters in the film who question the hierarchical order have Black and Latino voices. They live in the only place in the kingdom where light does not reach, the elephant graveyard. They have no food, they have no territory. Their only appearance in the Pride Lands is as invaders who destroy everything they touch. And when they ask the question of Scar, when they tell him they have no food, that they are hungry, that the current order gives them nothing, the film assigns them exactly the role the system always gives to those who dare to ask that question. Scholar Henry Giroux, in his analysis of Disney films as cultural pedagogy, noted that the coding of the hyenas, their visual design, their voices, their geography within the film, reproduced the stereotypes through which mass entertainment had historically represented marginalized communities, not as victims of a system, but as its natural enemy. The Lion King was released on June 15, 1994. On April 7, 1994, 69 days earlier, the genocide in Rwanda had begun. Between April and July of that year, in the heart of the African continent, a community identified as a threat to the political order was systematically exterminated. The radio called them cockroaches. Those carrying out the orders said they were purifying the land, that they were restoring stability. This is not an accusation against the film. Disney was not responsible for Rwanda. But it is a question about what it means to tell certain stories at certain moments. In the summer of 1994, while the African continent was living through the most brutal collapse of political order that century had produced, the cinema screens of the Western world were showing Africa as the place where the true king restores the natural order, where the circle of life is fulfilled, where everything returns to its place. And here is where the final blow of this mechanism becomes visible. Because if Disney truly wanted to tell an African story about an exiled prince who returns to claim his throne, that story already existed. They did not need to adapt Hamlet. It is called Sundiata Keita, Mali, the 13th century. A boy is born with a prophecy. He will be the greatest king the western coast of Africa has ever produced, but he is born with paralyzed legs. He cannot walk. The court despises him. His mother is publicly humiliated. At 7 years old, Sundiata does something no one expected. He stands. Not through magic. He rises, tears a baobab tree from the ground to use as a staff, and takes his first steps before the very court that had discarded him. Years later, in exile, he builds alliances with kingdoms that the Soso Empire of Sumanguru Kante had oppressed for generations. He does not return to the throne because it was the natural order. He returns because he convinced enough people that the future with him was better than the present without him. At the Battle of Kirina in 1235, he defeats Sumanguru, and what he builds is not a restored hierarchy. It is an empire that for 2 centuries will be the wealthiest and most literate in the known world. That story has no circle of life, no natural order to restore. Sundiata does not claim the throne because it was his. He builds it because it was necessary. It is the story of Amleth, the exile who returns, told from inside the very culture Disney used as its backdrop. And Disney did not tell it. It took the lions of the savannah, the voice of Lebo M singing in Zulu, the sun over Pride Rock. Africa was not the origin of the Lion King, it was the makeup. There is a pattern across these 3 versions that is not unique to this story. It is the pattern through which all stories about power transform over time. The first version always shows the mechanism, power, naked, without disguise. It shows you the structure and how it works. It asks you uncomfortable questions about who holds power and why. The second version internalizes it. It turns a political question into a philosophical one. The problem is no longer out there, it is in here. The system disappears. Individual psychology replaces it. The third version naturalizes it. Power stops being something someone built and someone can dismantle. It becomes the order of things, the circle of life, something that existed before you and will exist after. Something to sing about, not to question. And every time that transformation occurs, there is an entire childhood in the middle of it. Millions of children who learn, before they have the words to question it, that the world has a natural order, that every creature has its place, that the little lion cub who doubts his right to rule simply needs to remember who he is, that the circle never breaks, that this is how it was, how it is, how it will be. Amleth never asked himself whether he deserved the throne. He never asked whether he could forgive himself. He never sang to the cosmos that everything has its place in the grand design. He asked one thing only: who took what was mine, and what am I going to do about it? 800 years later, Disney took that question, brutal, political, unapologetic, and turned it into this: can I go home? It is not the same question. It never was. And the distance between those 2 questions is precisely the work that 30 centuries of storytellers have done to make sure you don't notice the substitution. Remember who you are, the ghost of the king tells Simba, but Amleth already knew. Amleth always knew. What Amleth knew was too dangerous to turn into a song. This is the Grimm Vault. The next tale, the story behind Wicked and the Nazi trial Maguire was studying when he wrote Elphaba.